There has been no reaction from the divider-in-chief today to Republican Senator Lindsey Graham's statement about him this morning. Mr. President, your words are dividing Americans, not healing them. Last night on this program, former Republican Congressman David Jolly predicted that Donald Trump has now divided the Republican Party to the point that he will have a Republican challenger or challengers in the next presidential campaign.
There's a lot of Republicans thinking tonight, if I can't find somebody to run against Donald Trump, I'll run against him myself.
Ohio Governor John Kasich was the last man standing against Donald Trump in the last Republican presidential primaries. And on the Today Show this morning, as soon as the governor was introduced, before he was asked a single question, John Kasich said this.
Pathetic, isn't it? Just pathetic. To not condemn these people who went there to carry out violence and to somehow draw some kind of equivalency to somebody else reduces the ability to totally condemn these hate groups. The president has to totally condemn this. There is no moral equivalency between the KKK, the neo-Nazis, and anybody else.
Today, Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell issued a statement saying we can have no tolerance for an ideology of racial hatred. There are no good neo-Nazis, and those who espouse their views are not supporters of American ideals and freedoms. Mitch McConnell's wife, Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao, was standing beside Donald Trump yesterday during the press conference that John Kasich and Mitch McConnell and other Republicans have been criticizing. Today, Senator Ted Cruz had no problem saying the kind of thing that Donald Trump should have said if he had the decency to actually think these things.
The president said that both sides were to blame and seemed to equate the white nationalists with the counter-protesters. Do you agree with him?
You know, the president speaks for himself. The Klan is evil. They are racist bigots. Nazis are the very face of evil. Their hatred, their anti-Semitism is completely unacceptable. And I think we should speak unequivocally, condemning their hatred, condemning their racism.
Our next guest is a former Republican who quit the Republican Party when Donald Trump secured the Republican presidential nomination. Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist George F. Will joins us next.
You know, this is terrible. The President of the United States needs to condemn these kind of hate groups. Think about what you have seen. You know, as one of the reporters said, reminiscent of what we saw in Germany in the 1930s. The President has to totally condemn this.
Joining us now, George F. Will, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the Washington Post and MSNBC political analyst. George, we have Willie Geist, our own Willie Geist, reporting via tweet tonight saying, sources close to John Kasich tell me after Charlottesville there is growing sense of, quote, moral imperative, quote, to primary Trump in 2020. Is John Kasich likely to be the man to take on an incumbent president within his own party?
Not the man, he'll be among the men, I assume. Ben Sasse has been in Iowa. Tom Cotton has been in Iowa. Now, Tom Cotton is much more sympathetic to Mr. Trump than either Kasich or Sasse. But the idea that he would be close to re-election, assuming he's still there and hasn't quit in a huff over the rigged system, is implausible.
I was struck by David Jolly on this program last night, basically saying, if I have to run against him myself, I will. Those are almost the exact words that Gene McCarthy said privately during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing in 1967, when the Undersecretary of State was testifying about Vietnam and outraging Gene McCarthy and Bill Fulbright on that committee. Gene McCarthy came away from that hearing saying privately to his chief of staff, if I have to run for president myself to stop this, I will. And he did. And the incumbent president he ran against, as of course you remember, dropped out of the race when he was challenged that way.
Well, see, the Republicans are in this awful position that they put themselves in when they made the Faustian bargain that they would have protracted, routine interactions with Mr. Trump, knowing that these would be diminishing and soiling to them, but they would get things done. Well, let's go to Washington's premier power couple. You mentioned a moment ago that Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, vastly experienced, hugely respected in Washington, stood there mute next to Mr. Trump during his rant yesterday. She did so because she was there because we were supposed to, at long last, talk about the $1 trillion infrastructure program. Tax reform's not going anywhere. Replace and repeal hasn't happened, but infrastructure was going to happen. The problem is, Winston Churchill once said of Secretary of State Dulles that he was a bull who carries his china shop around with him. That's what Mr. Trump does. So there's no such thing as being on message. There is no message but chaos. So on the one hand, Elaine Chao is there as a mere ornament, watching another opportunity slip away as the end of the 7th month of this barren presidency. She, of course, is married to the Senate Majority Leader. This week, he has been deeply involved in the Alabama Senate primary to fill the seat vacated by Mr. Sessions, who's now Attorney General. He's supporting the appointed senator, Mr. Luther Strange, against a man who's been removed twice from the Supreme Court of Alabama for defying the U.S. Supreme Court. In the Alabama race, I was down there looking at it in Birmingham. Trump is hugely popular, and McConnell is detested by all three candidates, and the three who entered this in the first round of the voting, saying we're loyal to Trump and we can't stand McConnell. And if you look at the polls among the Republican Party, the Republican base is still loyal to Mr. Trump, and by about 4 to 1, they prefer Trump over Mr. McConnell. So he's also in a position of having made this awful bargain on the assumption that we get something done, and it's a completely sterile presidency 7 months in.
There was a report tonight in USA Today saying that there was a delay in Mitch McConnell issuing his statement about those comments because he was, quote, livid. And his being livid, if he was, no doubt is related to his wife being, in effect, forced to stand there beside the president as he's making those remarks.
It's an old saying in politics that you know well, Lawrence, when you're explaining, you're losing. What's worse is when you're saying there really are no good neo-Nazis, you're really losing. I mean, when that is your message of the day, just think of that. I mean, Mr. McConnell was a Senate staffer before he became an institutional lifer in the Senate. And the agony he's going through to be tethered to this man.
George F. Will, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.